In the summer of 1748, a group of laborers were digging a well outside the city of Naples, Italy. They were not archaeologists. They were not explorers. They were not looking for anything. They were just digging. The foreman later recorded in his report that the men heard a sound, a low, dull echo rising from the ground beneath their feet. As if the earth itself were hollow. They dug deeper. What they found beneath the soil was not a tomb. It was not a collapsed building. It was a street. A perfectly preserved street, with sidewalks, with painted walls, with shop counters still stocked, with bread still sitting in ovens turned to stone. The city's name was Pompeii, and for nearly 2,000 years, it had been waiting exactly where it was left. The question that would haunt historians, archaeologists, and scientists for the next 3 centuries was never where it went. It was why it was never found sooner, and whether, against everything we believe, someone knew this was coming. To understand what was lost, you must first understand what was there. In the 1st century AD, Pompeii was not a small village. It was not a forgotten outpost on the edge of empire. It was alive. Historical records suggest Pompeii had a population of between 11,000 and 20,000 people at its peak. It was a commercial hub connected to the Bay of Naples, one of the most important trade routes in the ancient Mediterranean. The city had theaters, bathhouses with heated floors, a sophisticated aqueduct system that delivered fresh water directly to private homes. It had taverns with painted menus on the walls. It had electoral graffiti, citizens openly campaigning for local magistrates, their names still readable today. According to surviving inscriptions, one candidate named Gaius Julius Polybius promised, quote, "good bread, if elected." This was a real city. A noisy, ambitious, imperfect, fully human city. And it sat, as it always had, in the long shadow of a mountain. The Romans had a name for Vesuvius. They considered it sacred, connected to the god of fire and metal and fury. But they did not fear it. Because for as long as anyone in Pompeii could remember, it had never moved. When excavations began in earnest in the 18th century, archaeologists expected ruins. They expected collapse, ash, destruction. What they found instead stopped them cold. The bread was still in the ovens. 81 loaves, according to early excavation reports, each one stamped with the baker's mark, preserved in carbonized form by the superheated ash that covered them in 79 AD. The wine shop on Via dell'Abbondanza still had its price list painted on the wall. The surgical instruments found in the house of the surgeon, scalpels, forceps, probes, were arranged as if their owner had simply stepped away for a moment. But here is the detail that made no sense. In the weeks before the eruption of Vesuvius on August 24, 79 AD, the region had experienced significant seismic activity. Roman historian Pliny the Younger, an eyewitness who survived and wrote detailed accounts of the event, described tremors that had been shaking the area for days. The wells had gone dry. Animals were behaving strangely. The water in the bay was reportedly retreating from the shoreline. These were signs. Ancient signs. Signs that, according to some historians, certain Roman engineers and scholars of the time would have recognized. And yet, local accounts describe the majority of Pompeii's population as still present in the city when the mountain finally erupted. More than 2,000 bodies have been recovered from the ash. But here is what the record also shows, and what is almost never discussed. Estimates based on the city's known population suggest that the vast majority of Pompeii's inhabitants were not found in the ruins. The question is, when? And who told them to go? The formal excavation of Pompeii did not begin as a scientific endeavor. It began as a treasure hunt. In 1748, King Charles III of the Kingdom of Naples ordered the excavations to begin, not out of historical curiosity, but because word had spread that the ruins beneath the ground contained extraordinary art, mosaics, and objects of gold and silver. Workers were sent in. Objects were removed, often without documentation. Frescoes were cut directly from walls and transported to the royal palace. For decades, what lay beneath the soil of Campania was treated not as a sight to be understood, but as a vault to be emptied. It was not until the 19th century that systematic archaeological work began in earnest. And it was then that investigators started to realize what they were actually dealing with. The city was not simply destroyed. It was sealed. Geological analysis of the eruption later revealed that Vesuvius had expelled an estimated 4 cubic kilometers of rock and ash in less than 24 hours. The pumice and ash that buried Pompeii, in some areas reaching 6 meters in depth, created something close to an airtight seal over the city. Organic materials that would have decomposed in any other environment survived for nearly 2 millennia. Wooden furniture, fabric, food, and something else entirely. In 1863, archaeologist Giuseppe Fiorelli made a discovery that would redefine what it meant to find the dead. He noticed that the hardened ash contained hollow spaces, voids in the exact shape of human bodies. He filled them with plaster. What emerged from the earth were not skeletons. They were people, frozen in the last seconds of their lives, preserved not in stone, but in the precise shape of their final moments. The investigation had only just begun. Pompeii was not the only city buried that day. 3 separate settlements were destroyed in the eruption of 79 AD: Pompeii, Herculaneum, and Stabii. Each buried differently, each raising its own questions. But it was Pompeii that concentrated the most persistent historical debate. Because across the centuries, 3 major theories emerged about what really happened, and none of them fully closed the case. The mainstream scientific view holds that the eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD was a Plinian eruption of extraordinary violence, one of the most powerful volcanic events in recorded European history. Volcanologists estimate that the pyroclastic surges, superheated clouds of gas and ash moving at speeds of up to 700 kilometers per hour, would have killed anyone still in the city within minutes. Some historians believe that the population had no meaningful warning, that the mountain gave little indication of what was coming, and that those who died simply had no time to escape. The exact sequence of events on that day, according to this position, made survival largely a matter of where you happened to be standing. Pliny the Younger's letters, written years after the event and considered among the most important eyewitness historical accounts in antiquity, describe a period of increasing instability before the eruption. Some historians believe that the tremors, the dying springs, and the strange behavior of animals in the days preceding August 24 constituted warning signs that were observable, but misinterpreted or dismissed. In Roman culture, earthquakes were so common in the Campania region that they were often treated as ordinary disturbances. A major earthquake had already devastated Pompeii in 62 AD, 17 years before the eruption. The population, according to this theory, had been conditioned by repetition to underestimate the mountain's signals. This is the theory that remains most contested and most difficult to dismiss. Archaeological evidence suggests that in the weeks or months before the eruption, certain wealthier residents of Pompeii had already begun quietly removing their most valuable possessions. Several of the city's largest homes showed signs of being partially packed up, furniture moved, objects missing from their original locations, valuables absent that would be expected to remain in place. Some historians believe this points to advanced knowledge among the city's elite, a private network of warning that did not extend to the general population. The exact cause of what some left behind, and what some took, remains a subject of active academic debate. But one detail, recovered from the ruins, suggests that someone, at least, had enough time to make a choice. In 1752, a few kilometers from Pompeii, in the buried city of Herculaneum, workers uncovered something extraordinary. A library. The villa of the papyri contained over 1,800 carbonized scrolls, one of the largest surviving collections of ancient texts in the world. The scrolls were so fragile that early attempts to open them caused them to crumble to dust. For nearly 3 centuries, most of them remained unread. It was not until the 21st century, using X-ray phase contrast tomography and artificial intelligence, that researchers finally began deciphering what those scrolls contained. According to surviving documents and recent scientific analysis, the texts include philosophical works, historical records, and, critically, what appear to be geographical and astronomical observations that were current in the years immediately preceding 79 AD. What those documents say about the mountain itself, if anything, has not yet been fully disclosed. But Pliny the Younger left a record that has survived intact for nearly 2,000 years. And in that record, in letters addressed to the Roman historian Tacitus, he describes something that stops researchers cold, even today. He describes his uncle, Pliny the Elder, a naval commander, a naturalist, one of the most educated men in Rome, sailing toward Vesuvius as it erupted. Not away from it. Pliny the Elder commanded a fleet of warships anchored at Misenum, across the bay. When the eruption began, he gave the order to cross the water and approach the mountain. According to his nephew's account, he wanted to observe, to understand, to document what was happening. He never returned. His body was found 3 days later on the beach at Stabii. No visible wounds, no burns. Historical records suggest he may have died of respiratory failure, suffocated by the volcanic gases. But the manner of his death was never conclusively established. The most educated man in Rome sailed toward the end of the world to understand it, and took his knowledge with him. For more than 2 centuries of systematic excavation, Pompeii has revealed extraordinary things. And it has refused to answer its most important question. In 2018, a team of bioarchaeologists published a study analyzing the skeletal remains of those found in Pompeii's large covered theater, the Odeon, where several dozen bodies were found clustered together. The individuals showed signs of significant physical stress and poor nutrition in the years before the eruption. They were not the city's wealthy residents. They were, according to the study, likely slaves, laborers, or the urban poor. This raised a question that archaeology alone cannot answer. If wealthier residents had access to information, or simply to horses, to carts, to the social networks that make escape possible, then the bodies found in Pompeii's ruins may disproportionately represent those who had no means to leave. Not because the warning didn't come, but because the warning didn't reach them. Modern volcanologists have confirmed that the pyroclastic surge that killed the remaining population of Pompeii arrived with virtually no warning, traveling at extraordinary speed, incinerating everything in its path in under 4 minutes. Those who remained at that stage had no possibility of escape. But the question of what happened in the hours and days before that final surge, who knew, who left, who stayed, and why, remains open. There is one more detail that historians have never satisfactorily resolved. The city of Pompeii does not appear, by name, in any surviving Roman text written between 79 AD and its rediscovery in the 16th century. Not in histories. Not in maps. Not in legal records. Not in correspondence. A city of 20,000 people, a commercial hub, a place where thousands of Romans lived and worked and died, vanished from the written record. Some historians believe this is simply a function of time. Most Roman documents from this period have not survived. Others have noted, more quietly, that the absence is almost too complete. As if someone decided, in the years after the eruption, that what was buried should stay buried. The exact reason for this silence in the historical record remains unknown. Vesuvius has erupted more than 50 times since 79 AD. Its most recent major eruption was in 1944, during the Second World War, as Allied forces advanced through Italy. Today, nearly 3 million people live within the mountain's potential danger zone. Pompeii was not unique in being built in the shadow of something dangerous. It was simply the city where the record survived. In 2020, excavations in a previously unexcavated sector of Pompeii uncovered a room that had not been touched since the eruption. Inside, researchers found the skeletal remains of 2 individuals, an older man and a younger man, possibly a slave and his master, locked in a final embrace. Their position suggested they had been seeking shelter, waiting for something to pass. Around them, the room was almost entirely intact. A bed, a wooden chest, an oil lamp, a small bronze amulet, the kind Romans wore for protection. Pompeii is not a monument to catastrophe. It is a monument to the ordinary, to bread and wine and politics and noise and the particular human belief that tomorrow will arrive much like today. 2,000 years after it was buried, the city still holds its secrets close. Who left early, and why? What the mountain said before it spoke its final word. Why the written world forgot, so completely, what had been there. The records survived.